I've been driving long haul for 6 years now, mostly the southern route. Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, sometimes up into Nevada if the load calls for it. My rig's a 2019 Freightliner Cascadia, silver with a chip in the paint on the driver door from a rock that kicked up outside Amarillo. I mention that because it matters later, weirdly. Small things end up mattering. This happened in March of 2024 on I-40 westbound, somewhere between Seligman and Kingman, Arizona. If you've never driven that stretch, it's about as empty as American highway gets. Old Route 66 runs parallel to it in pieces, cracked and half swallowed by scrub brush. And there are stretches where you won't see another vehicle for 20-25 minutes at a time. Cell service comes and goes. At night, it's just your headlights and whatever your high beams decide to reveal. I was hauling a refrigerated load, produce, headed to a distribution center outside Vegas, and I'd left Albuquerque around 4 p.m., planning to push through to a truck stop I liked near Kingman before taking my mandatory rest. My name's Dana Kowalski. I'm 34, and at the time I'd been solo driving for about 4 years after my divorce. I liked the solitude, honestly. I had a routine. Gas station coffee, a playlist my niece made me that I'd never admit to liking as much as I did, and a CB radio I mostly used for weather and traffic, since most drivers don't really chat much on it anymore. Around 9:40 p.m. I noticed the way station sign, the one just past milepost 123, before you hit the long downhill grade into the Aubrey Hills area. It's usually closed at night. I'd passed it probably 200 times over the years, and maybe a dozen of those it had actually been open and staffed. That night, the lights were on. Not the lights you'd expect, though, not the sodium orange overheads that make everything look sickly yellow. These were brighter, almost blue-white, like someone had swapped out every bulb in the place. And there was a truck parked in the inspection bay. A cab over, older model, maybe a Freightliner FLB from the late 80s or early 90s. The kind you don't see much anymore outside of collector shows. No trailer attached, just the tractor sitting there, engine off as far as I could tell, because there was no exhaust, no vibration. I didn't think much of it at first. Way stations open up sometimes for random inspections. DOT does surprise checks. I kept driving. About 4 miles past it, my CB crackled. Static first. The kind of static you get from a bad connection, and then a voice. Male, older sounding, kind of gravelly. I want to be really clear about something here. My CB handle isn't Kowalski. Nobody on the road knows me by my last name. I go by Copper Penny. Dumb, I know. My ex-husband used to joke I picked it because of my hair, and honestly, he wasn't wrong. Nobody uses my real name on the radio. I remember my hands went a little cold on the wheel. Nothing came back. Just static, then silence. Then the channel went quiet in that specific way where you can tell no one's transmitting at all. Not even the ambient hiss you get from an open channel. I told myself it was a coincidence. Maybe I'd said my name somewhere, some dispatch call that got picked up on an open channel, who knows? Truckers gossip, share information. Sometimes company names or driver names get passed around on certain channels if there's an issue with a load. I decided it was something like that and kept driving. Here's where it gets slower, and I want to walk through it slow, because that's how it happened. It wasn't one big scare. It was a lot of small ones stacking up until I couldn't ignore them anymore. About 20 minutes later, I saw headlights behind me. 2 of them, high up, definitely a semi, and it was closing distance fast, faster than felt normal for that stretch of road, where most drivers keep a steady 70-72 miles per hour because of the grades. I checked my mirror and the lights vanished. Not faded, not dimmed, gone, like someone had cut them, in a spot where there's no exit, no side road, nothing to turn onto. I remember looking again about 10 seconds later, and the road behind me was just dark. No taillights of a truck that had passed. No headlights of one that had pulled off. Nothing. I turned my radio up, some old habit of drowning out nerves with noise, and kept my eyes forward. Around 11:15 p.m., I stopped at a gas station in Kingman, one of those Chevron stations off Andy Devine Avenue, real place, still there. I actually looked it up recently just to make sure I wasn't misremembering the name. I got out to stretch, grabbed a coffee, used the bathroom, texted my niece Emma something dumb about how West Coast time was going to wreck my sleep schedule again. Normal stuff. I felt better being around people, even if it was just the one clerk and a guy pumping gas into a Silverado. That's when the FLB pulled in. Same truck. I'm almost positive it was the same truck. Cab over, no trailer, that specific faded red and white paint job with a stripe down the side that had mostly worn off. It didn't pull up to a pump. It just rolled into the lot and stopped near the edge, engine idling, headlights off even though it was fully dark out. I stood there for a second just watching it. coffee in my hand, feeling that specific kind of stupid where you're telling yourself you're being paranoid while your body is already deciding to be scared. Nobody got out. I couldn't see into the cab because of the angle of the streetlight. Just this dark shape behind the glass that might have been a driver, might have been nothing, might have been the reflection of the pump. I pointed. The lot was empty, no truck. I hadn't heard it pull away, no engine noise, no gravel, nothing. But it was gone. I want to be honest, at this point I was rattled enough that I sat in my own truck for probably 20 minutes before I felt okay to drive again. I called my dispatcher, a guy named Marcus Whitfield, who I'd worked with for about 3 years, mostly to hear a familiar voice, made up some excuse about checking my delivery window. We talked for a few minutes about nothing. It helped. I told myself I'd just imagined the whole CB thing, that the truck at the gas station was some other trucker who left while I wasn't looking, that I was tired and stressed, and seeing patterns where there weren't any. I got back on I-40 around midnight. The next 20 miles were fine. Genuinely fine, quiet, normal trucking. I started to relax. I even sang along to Emma's playlist a little, something embarrassing by an artist I won't name because if she ever reads this, she'll never let me live it down. Then, around 12:40 a.m., my headlights caught something on the shoulder up ahead. At first I thought it was debris, a blown tire tread, something like that. As I got closer, I realized it was a road flare, still burning, and past it, pulled half onto the shoulder and half onto the actual lane, was a car. A sedan, dark-colored, hazards on. I'm not an idiot, and I know the stories about people faking breakdowns to rob or hurt drivers who stopped to help, but this felt different. There was a woman standing outside the car, waving, and as I slowed down, I could see she was maybe in her 20s, wearing a college sweatshirt, looked absolutely terrified, not in a performative way, in a way that made my stomach drop a little in sympathy before anything else. I pulled over, hazards on, left my truck running, and climbed down. She ran up to me before I even got both feet on the ground. She said her name was Priya. She was driving back to Flagstaff from visiting her sister in Vegas, and her car had died about 20 minutes earlier. But that's not what had her so shaken. She said a truck had stopped behind her, no trailer, and just sat there with its high beams on, not moving, not saying anything, for almost 15 minutes before she saw it pull away right before I showed. I felt that same cold drop in my stomach from the CB call. I asked her what it looked like. She described it. Cab over, older, no trailer, and my mouth went dry. I told her I'd call for help, and my phone actually had one bar right there, enough to get through to 911. While I was on the phone with the dispatcher giving our location, mile marker, direction of travel, all of it, Priya grabbed my arm hard and pointed back down the highway. Headlights, coming up slow. No sound of an engine, which doesn't make sense for a diesel truck. They're loud, you feel them in your chest before you even see them clearly. But there was nothing, just the sound of wind and my own truck idling. I hung up mid-sentence, I think. I genuinely don't remember finishing that call, and I told Priya to get in my cab. She didn't argue. We climbed up, I locked the doors, and I watched in the mirror as the headlights closed the distance. It didn't stop where her car was. It slowed down right alongside my trailer. I don't have a trailer, remember, so it slowed down right alongside my tractor and matched my idle speed exactly like it was pacing me. I couldn't see a driver. The cab windows were dark in a way that didn't match the moonlight, like they were tinted or fogged from the inside, even though it wasn't cold enough. Priya was gripping the door handle so hard her knuckles had gone white. Neither of us said anything for what felt like a full minute, but was probably closer to 20 seconds. Then a voice came through my CB again. Same gravelly voice. I don't know why that specific sentence still gets to me more than anything else that happened that night. It wasn't a threat, not exactly. It was almost bureaucratic, like whatever was happening operated on some kind of logic, some kind of rule, and Priya being in my truck had violated it somehow. The truck outside pulled forward, slow, deliberate, until it was fully alongside my door, and for just a second, maybe 2 seconds, no more, the driver's side window was close enough and the angle was right, and I saw someone in the cab. I want to be careful here because I've thought about this moment more than any other part of that night, and I still don't fully trust what I saw. It was a man, older, wearing what looked like an old-style trucking uniform, the kind with a company patch on the shoulder, and his face was turned toward me, but his eyes didn't track like a normal person's eyes do when they're looking at something. It was like watching a photograph of someone rotate slightly. Then he was gone. The truck sped up, and this time I did hear the engine, a full roar of it, completely normal diesel sound, and its taillights shrank down the highway until they disappeared over the grade. Priya and I sat there for a long time before either of us spoke. I ended up calling 911 back, explained the disconnected call. They sent a trooper out. We waited together with my hazards on and the cab light on until he arrived almost 40 minutes. He didn't find any sign of another truck. No tire marks besides Priya's car and mine. Nothing on any recent report matching an unregistered cab overrunning without a trailer or plates in that area. I gave Priya a ride into Kingman myself, waited with her at a motel until her sister could come get her the next morning, and we exchanged numbers. We still talk sometimes, actually, every few months, mostly just checking in. Neither of us has ever fully explained what happened that night to anyone who wasn't there, because there isn't really a way to say it that doesn't sound insane. Here's the detail that still bothers me, the one I've never told anyone outside of this. About 2 weeks later, back home in Amarillo, I was cleaning out my truck and found a way station receipt tucked into the visor. Printed, official looking, from that exact station off I-40 near milepost 123. Time-stamped 9:41 p.m. the same night. It listed my truck's information correctly. Plate, DOT number, gross weight, all accurate. But the inspector's signature line just said J. Renfro, and when I looked up way station staff records for that facility going back years, there's never been a J. Renfro employed there. I called the station directly. The woman I spoke to had never heard the name either, and she told me, almost offhand, that the station's been closed for overnight staffing since 2019 due to budget cut. I still drive that stretch sometimes. I have to, it's part of the route. I don't stop at that gas station anymore, and I always keep my CB off for that particular 20-mile section, which I know doesn't make logical sense, since whatever happened clearly didn't need the radio to find me in the first place. It's just something that makes me feel a little better, and after that night, I decided I was allowed to have things that make me feel a little better, even if they don't hold up to scrutiny. I never did find out who, or what, J. Renfro was supposed to be. Story 2, Night Shift at the Flying J. I need to say up front that I don't drive trucks myself. I worked the overnight shift at a truck stop for almost 3 years, from late 2022 until I quit in the fall of 2025. And this happened at the location off I-70 near Limon, Colorado, out on the eastern plains where the interstate splits toward Denver one way and stretches flat and empty toward Kansas the other way. If you've ever driven I-70 through there, you know what I mean when I say there's nothing. Just grain elevators, a water tower, and highway for miles in every direction. My name is Sam Okafor. I was 26 at the time, going to community college part-time for an accounting degree. Working nights because the pay differential was decent, and it let me study during the slow. The truck stop had a name I won't use exactly since I still know people who work there, but it was one of those big chain lots, fuel islands, a convenience store, a Subway that closed at 10, a driver's lounge with showers, and a gravel overflow lot in the back where drivers parked for their mandatory rest when the main lot filled up. I liked the job, honestly, for a long time. Nights are quiet in a specific way that some people can't handle, and I loved. You get to know the regulars, not by name usually, but by truck, by habit. There was a guy who came through every Tuesday around 2 a.m. hauling cattle, always bought 2 energy drinks and a bag of sunflower seeds. A woman named Denise, who ran a produce route, and always waved, even though I don't think we ever exchanged more than 10 words total across 2 years. The thing I want to explain, before I get to what happened, is how normal everything felt right up until it didn't. There wasn't a single moment where I thought, this place is dangerous, this is going to be a horror story someday. It built so slowly that I only understood the shape of it in hindsight. It started, as far as I can tell, in June of 2024. I noticed a truck in the overflow lot that I didn't recognize, a white box truck. Not even a semi really, more like a straight truck, the kind you'd rent to move furniture. Except this one had no rental company markings, just plain white with a temp tag taped inside the windshield. It parked in the far back corner, away from the lights, which wasn't unusual exactly. Some drivers like the dark for sleeping, but something about its position bothered me. It was backed in at an angle that put its rear doors facing the tree line instead of the lot, so you couldn't see them from the store or from most other trucks. It stayed there 3 days. I only noticed because I clocked in at 10 p.m. each night, and it was already there when I arrived, still there when I left at 6 a.m. On the third night, around 3 a.m., I walked out to the overflow lot to grab a shopping cart that had rolled out there. Dumb reason, I know, but that's genuinely why I was back there. And as I got close to the white truck, I heard something, banging. Not loud, not frantic, just a slow, rhythmic banging from inside the box part of the truck. Like someone tapping something against the metal wall, over and over, evenly spaced. I stood there for probably 10 seconds just listening, telling myself it was cargo shifting, a loose strap, something mechanical. Trucks make noise, things settle, but the rhythm was too even for that. It wasn't random the way cargo would be. It was steady, almost like counting. I didn't go closer. I want to be honest about that. I've replayed that moment 100 times since, wondering if I should have knocked, should have called out, should have done something. Instead, I grabbed the cart and walked back inside fast, and I told myself it was nothing, because that's what you do at 3 a.m. alone in a truck stop in the middle of nowhere, Colorado. You tell yourself it's nothing, so you can keep functioning. The truck was gone by the time I clocked in the next night. I mostly forgot about it, or tried to, until about 6 weeks later when a state trooper came by the store. This was late July, asking if we had security footage covering the overflow lot going back to mid-June. He didn't say why, just that it was part of an ongoing investigation. Our system only kept 30 days of footage on a loop, so whatever he was looking for, we didn't have it anymore. He left a card. I still have it somewhere, I think. Trooper name was Halverson, Colorado State Patrol. I asked my manager, a guy named Roberto Fields who'd worked there almost a decade, if he knew what the trooper wanted. He said he'd heard something through another manager at a different Flying J down the interstate, that there'd been at least 2 women, both hitchhikers or stranded motorists, who'd been picked up along I-70 that summer and never made contact with anyone. He said it carefully, the way you talk about something you don't fully believe but also can't dismiss. Truck stop rumors are like that. Half of them are nothing, but you never know which half. I didn't think about the white truck again until September. It came back. Same plain white box truck, same temp tag, same parking spot in the far corner, angled the same exact way. I remember standing at the front register just staring out the window at it for a long moment before I made myself go back to restocking cigarettes. That night, around 1:20 a.m., a woman came into the store. She looked maybe early 30s, wearing a flannel over a tank top, hair kind of wild, like she'd been out in wind, and she had this look on her face that I want to describe carefully because it stuck with me. Not panicked exactly, more like someone doing a lot of work to it. She bought a bottle of water and a phone charger, one of the cheap ones we kept behind the counter, and while I was ringing her up, she asked very quietly if she could wait inside the store for a bit before going back out to her car. I said, sure, of course, we don't usually mind that. She sat in the little seating area near the subway, which was closed, and just sat there with her water, not really doing anything, glancing at the door every so often. Around 2 a.m., the bell on the door chimed and a man walked in. Average height, maybe 40s, wearing a plain gray work jacket, ball cap pulled low. He didn't buy anything. He walked slowly down one aisle, then another, in that particular way where someone's clearly not shopping, they're looking for something else. And eventually he ended up near the seating area where the woman. He didn't say anything to her that I could hear. He just stood near her table, maybe 6 feet away, for what felt like a really long time, probably closer to a minute and a half, just standing there. She didn't look up. She got very still, the way you get still when you're trying not to draw attention to yourself, like an animal that's frozen. I came around the counter, I don't fully know why, some instinct, and asked if I could help him find anything. He looked at me, and I remember this clearly. His eyes were pale, almost colorless in the store lighting, and said, "Just waiting on someone," and then walked out. The second the door closed behind him, the woman stood up fast and asked if she could use our employee phone, said hers had died, hadn't wanted to say anything in front of him. I let her use the store landline in the back office. She called someone. I didn't listen to the conversation, gave her privacy, and about 20 minutes later, a car pulled up outside driven by another woman, and my customer left with her, practically running to the car. She never told me what was going on, and I never asked directly, but as she was leaving, she paused at the door and said, "That's the 3rd time he's been at a stop I'm at." Then she was gone, and I never saw her again, never got a name. I looked out at the overflow lot after that. The white box truck was gone. I hadn't heard it leave. This is where things get harder to explain, and harder to talk about without sounding like I'm exaggerating for effect, which I promise I'm not. About 2 weeks after that night, I started noticing the gray jacket man on our security footage, from nights I wasn't even working. I only found this because I got curious and asked Roberto if I could pull up some old clips, told him I wanted to check something for insurance reasons, which wasn't really true. He let me look through about 2 weeks of footage with him, and the man showed up on 4 separate nights, always around 1:30 to 2:30 a.m., always just walking the aisles without buying anything, always eventually drifting toward wherever a woman was sitting alone, if there was. On nights when there wasn't a woman sitting alone, he didn't come in at all. That's the detail that got to me. It was like he could tell from outside. I brought this up to Roberto and he got quiet, and eventually admitted he'd noticed something similar but had talked himself out of it being anything, same as I had. We agreed to call Trooper Halverson's number and report it, describe the white truck, describe the man, gave him the footage timestamps. Nothing came of it immediately, as far as we ever heard. No arrest, no follow-up that we were told about, which is its own kind of unsettling. The not knowing whether reporting it did anything at all. The last time I saw him was in early October, my 3rd to last week working there before I eventually transferred to a location closer to Denver, partly because of school, and partly, if I'm honest, because I didn't want to be alone on that overnight shift anymore. It was around 2:10 a.m., quiet night, maybe 2 other customers in the whole store. I was restocking the cooler when I felt like someone was watching me, that specific prickling feeling on the back of your neck. And when I turned around, he was standing at the end of the aisle, just looking at me. Not a customer near me, just... He didn't say anything. I didn't either. Honestly, I couldn't. My throat just locked up. After maybe 5 seconds, he turned and walked out, unhurried, and I watched through the window as he crossed the lot toward the overflow area, toward where I somehow already knew the white truck would be parked, even though I hadn't seen it pull in that night. I called Roberto, who was off that night, just to have someone to talk to. He told me to lock the front doors and stay behind the counter until another employee came in for the early shift, which I did, and nothing else happened that night. But I never saw the man again after that, and about a week later, the white box truck's temp tag apparently expired, according to something Roberto mentioned secondhand from another employee who'd looked into it out of morbid curiosity. The temp tag had been registered to a name that turned out to belong to someone who died 4 years ago. I transferred out not long after. I still think about that woman with the flannel sometimes. Wonder if she's okay. Wonder if there were others on nights I wasn't working who didn't get a phone to use, didn't have someone come pick them up in time. I never found out anything more concrete than what I've already told you, and Trooper Halverson's card eventually got thrown out during a move, so I don't even have a way to follow up now, even if I wanted to. The thing that still gets me, more than the man himself, is that detail about the store. How he only ever came in on nights there was a woman alone. I've never been able to figure out how he knew that from outside, before the door even opened, before he could have seen in. Our windows were tinted from years of sun exposure, hard to see through clearly from the parking lot at night. I checked later, standing outside myself on a slow shift, trying to see what he might have. I couldn't think I had glass from where he always parked. I still don't know how he always knew. Story 3. The rest area off Route 40. I drove for a regional produce distributor out of Salt Lake City for about 8 years, mostly short to mid-haul routes through Utah, Nevada, and sometimes into western Colorado. This happened in late October of 2023, on Highway 40 heading toward Vernal, Utah, on a stretch that cuts through some genuinely isolated country. High desert, red rock, the kind of place where your phone shows 0 bars for 45 minutes at a stretch, and you just have to trust your GPS was right before you lost signal. I was 41 that year, married, 2 kids, and I drove that route often enough that I developed a whole mental map of every rest stop, every gas station, every spot where truckers pulled off to sleep. There's a rest area off 40, west of Vernal, that most drivers just call the pullout because it's not even a real rest area, just a wide gravel shoulder with 2 picnic tables and a vault toilet that smells about how you'd expect. No lights except one flickering sodium lamp on a pole that had been half broken as long as I'd been driving that. I want to explain something about myself before I get into what happened, because I think it matters for understanding why I reacted the way I did. I don't scare easy. I did 2 tours overseas before I got into trucking, and I've dealt with plenty of things on the road that would rattle most people. Breakdowns in blizzards, a jackknife trailer on black ice outside Price, a guy who tried to break into my cab outside a truck stop in Nevada once, which I handled fine, because I'm a big guy, and I know how to make myself look like more trouble than I'm worth. I'm telling you this so you understand that when I say something scared me badly enough that I still think about it 2 years later, I'm not exaggerating for effect. It was a Thursday night, October 26th, and I remember the date specifically because it was 2 days before my daughter's birthday, and I'd been trying to time my route so I'd be home for it. I pulled into the gravel pullout around 11:50 p.m., planning to take a mandatory 10-hour rest before finishing the run the next morning. There was one other truck there when I arrived, a green Kenworth I didn't recognize, parked at the far end near the tree line, no lights on, driver presumably already asleep. I backed my truck in, killed the engine, ran my APU for climate control, and settled in with a book on my phone, since I had a little battery left before I'd need to plug in. Normal night, wind picking up outside, that dry desert wind that makes a specific whistling sound against the mirror. Around 1:15 a.m., I heard a knock on my passenger door. Now, I want to be clear, that's not normal. Nobody knocks on a sleeper cab door at a random gravel pullout in the middle of nowhere at 1 a.m. If someone needs something, they usually flash their lights, honk, or wait until morning. A direct knock on the door is a level of directness that immediately put me on edge, ex-military instincts or not. I looked through the small window and saw a man standing there. Maybe late 50s, thin, wearing a canvas jacket that looked too heavy for the weather, and he had his hand up like he was about to knock again. I didn't open the door. I cracked the window instead, just a couple inches, and asked what he said his truck had broken down, gestured vaguely back toward the green Kenworth, and asked if I had a way to charge his phone, Said his battery bank had died and he needed to call his dispatch. Reasonable enough story on its face, except something about him bothered me immediately, and it took me a minute to place what it was. He wasn't dressed like a trucker. Truckers who've been on the road a while have a look to them: boots, certain kind of jacket, the way you carry a phone or a logbook. This guy's clothes looked almost costume-like, too clean, like he'd bought them recently and hadn't. I told him I didn't have a spare charger, which was a lie, and that he should try the CB to reach a passing trucker instead. He nodded, said thanks, and walked back toward the green truck. I watched him go the whole way in my mirror. He didn't get in the truck. He walked past it, into the tree line, and disappeared into the dark. I sat there for a long moment, turning that over. If his truck was broken down, why walk past it into the trees? I told myself maybe he was going to relieve himself. People do that at rest stops, nothing sinister about it necessarily. But something in my gut had already decided this wasn't right, and 20 years of trusting that gut feeling in less friendly parts of the world had taught me not to argue. I locked every door in my cab. I always kept them locked, but I checked twice, and sat up for a while instead of trying to sleep. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps on gravel outside, slow, deliberate, circling. I couldn't see anyone from my window at that angle. The footsteps went all the way around my trailer. I could hear them shift from gravel to the duller sound of walking near the tires, and then stopped directly behind my cab, near my sleeper window, for almost a full minute. Just silence. No more footsteps, but also no sound of them walking away. Then, very quietly, almost too quiet to be sure I heard it at all, someone said my name. Not my CB handle, my actual first name. I don't have an explanation for how anyone out there would have known that. My truck's not marked with my name anywhere visible. My company doesn't put driver names on the door, just a fleet number. I don't wear a name tag. I hadn't spoken to the man at the door long enough to introduce myself, and I definitely hadn't told him my name. I grabbed the tire iron I kept clipped near my bunk, habit from years on the road. Most drivers keep something, and sat there gripping it, engine off, lights off, just listening. The footsteps eventually moved away, slow, unhurried, back toward the tree line. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Around 4:30 a.m., another truck pulled into the lot. A big flatbed hauling steel. Driver got out to use the vault toilet. Completely normal presence. And something about having another visible human being there made me feel steady enough to finally doze for maybe an hour before first light. When the sun came up, I got out to check my truck for any damage, tire tampering, anything. Everything looked fine. But the green Kenworth was still there. And now I could see it clearly in daylight. And something about it made my skin crawl in a different way than the night before. It had Nevada plates that were so caked in dust and grime, they looked like they hadn't been touched in months, maybe longer, like the truck had been sitting in that exact spot, far longer than one night. I walked closer, against my better judgment honestly, and looked in through the driver's window. Dust coated the dashboard thick enough to write your name in it. The seats had a grayish film over them. There was a coffee cup in the cup holder that had long since evaporated down to a dried brown ring. This truck hadn't moved in a very long time. It definitely hadn't broken down the night before. I called it into the county sheriff's office once I had signal again, about 40 minutes down the road. A deputy met me at a gas station in Vernal and took my statement, said they'd send someone out to check the vehicle's registration and figure out if it was abandoned or reported stolen. I gave a description of the man as best I could. The canvas jacket, the 2 clean clothes, but I never heard back anything conclusive. I called that sheriff's office again about 3 weeks later, mostly out of nagging curiosity. And the deputy I spoke with, different one than before, said the truck's registration had come back to an owner who'd passed away in 2019, and that the plates themselves had actually been reported stolen out of a different county entirely years earlier. Nobody had a clear answer for how long it had been sitting at that pullout or why. He didn't push for more detail, which I was grateful for, because I genuinely don't think I could have explained it in a way that didn't sound on him. The detail that's never sat right with me, more than the man, more than the truck, is the way he said my name. Not shouted, not threatening in tone even, almost gentle, like he was greeting someone he already knew well. I've turned that over more times than I can count, trying to find some rational explanation. Maybe I'd said it out loud to myself at some point without realizing. Maybe there was something on my truck I'd missed. But I've never landed on an answer that actually satisfies me. My wife thinks I should stop driving that region entirely. Some nights, especially around late October when the anniversary of it rolls back around, I think she might be right. But it's my route, my job. And truckers don't really get to just avoid stretches of highway because something happened once. You learn to drive past it, keep your locks checked twice instead of once, and try not to think too hard about what might be sitting quiet and dust-covered in the dark just past your headlights. Story 4. Mile marker 217. I'm a state highway maintenance worker, not a trucker myself, but this happened while I was doing overnight work on I-84 in eastern Oregon, near the town of Baker City, in the summer of 2025. I want to start there because I think it matters. I wasn't a passing driver who saw something once and drove off. I was out there for 6 nights straight, working the same stretch of highway, and what happened built up slowly across those nights in a way that I don't think would have felt as real if it had just been one isolated incident. My name's Kelly Van Tassel. I was 37 that summer, married to my husband Doug, no kids, and I'd worked for the Oregon Department of Transportation for about 9 years by then, mostly doing striping and signage work, sometimes debris cleanup after storms. That July, our crew got assigned to a nighttime lane marking job on I-84 between Baker City and the North Powder exit, redoing the reflective striping on a stretch that had faded badly. Nighttime work because obviously you can't shut down an interstate lane during the day without causing chaos. Our crew was small. Myself, a guy named Foster Okonkwo, who ran the striping machine, and 2 flaggers who rotated depending on the night. Usually either a younger guy named Colt Ashby or a woman named Regina Prosser, who'd been doing flagging work for almost 20 years, and had, frankly, seen everything. We worked from a.m. to 6 a.m., with the interstate down to 1 lane through our work zone, cones and message boards warning drivers for a mile in either direction. The first few nights were completely unremarkable. Truck traffic through that stretch is heavy, since it's a major freight corridor connecting Boise to Portland, and we got used to the rhythm of headlights slowing. Drivers usually courteous about the lane closure, occasional annoyed honk from someone in a hurry. Nothing out of the ordinary. It started on the 4th night, a Wednesday. Around 2:20 a.m., Regina was flagging at the west end of our work zone, about a quarter mile from where Foster and I were working the striping machine. She radioed in. We used handheld radios to communicate across the work zone, and said a truck had slowed to almost a stop in front of her sign, well below the already reduced work zone speed, and just sat there for almost 2 full minutes before continuing through. That happens sometimes. Drivers get confused by flaggers, especially at night when depth perception's harder, so none of us thought much of it. But Regina mentioned something in that call that stuck with me even then. She said the driver never looked at her sign at all. He was looking directly at her the entire time, not at the road, not at the slow paddle she was holding up, just at her until he finally rolled forward. The truck came through our stretch a few minutes later. Cab over, no trailer. I remember that detail clearly because you don't see many cab-overs on modern interstates anymore. They're mostly a design from decades back, and this one looked old, faded paint, no visible company markings. It rolled past us slow, well under our posted work zone speed, even after passing Regina's sign, slow enough that I got a decent look at it as it passed the striping machine. I couldn't see a driver clearly through the windshield glare from our work lights, just a shape. Foster made a comment about it being a weird old rig, and we moved on. I didn't think about it again until the next night. Night 5, same setup, and around 1:50 a.m., almost the same time as the night before. Colt was on the flagging shift instead of Regina, at the same west position. He radioed in sounding rattled, said the same truck, or one that looked identical, had stopped completely in front of him this time, not just slowed. Sat there with the engine idling for almost 4 minutes. Colt said he'd waved his light, tried to signal the driver to keep it slow rolling since we couldn't have vehicles stopped fully in a live lane closure, and the truck didn't respond to any of it. Eventually, it just started moving again, on its own. When it came through our section this time, I made a point of trying to see the driver. The cab windows were tinted darker than felt legal, honestly. Dark enough that at night with our work lights hitting the glass at an angle, I still couldn't make out a clear shape inside. Just an impression of stillness, like whoever or whatever was in there wasn't moving at all, not even the small unconscious movements a person makes while driving. I brought it up with my supervisor the next day during our shift debrief, mostly just to log it in case it happened again, describe the truck, no plates visible that any of us had caught, no company name, no trailer. He said he'd flag it for state patrol to keep an eye out, but didn't seem especially concerned. Chalked it up to a weird driver, maybe someone impaired or having a medical episode behind the wheel who somehow kept managing to drive fine. Night 6 is the one I still have trouble talking about clearly, even now. It was quieter than usual for a while, past 1 a.m. with lighter traffic than the previous nights. Around 2:05 a.m., my radio picked up Regina's voice. She was back on flagging duty that night, but the transmission was garbled, cutting in and out with static in a way our radios hadn't done all week. And then nothing. I told Foster to hold the striping machine, and I started walking down the shoulder toward Regina's position, radio in hand, trying to raise her again with no luck. The quarter mile felt a lot longer than it should have. My work light cast that specific kind of narrow tunnel of visibility you get from a headlamp at night on an empty highway. Everything past maybe 30 feet just... I found Regina standing in her flagging position, sign still raised, but she wasn't moving, wasn't reacting to me walking up despite my boots clearly audible on the shoulder gravel. I said her name and she didn't respond for a few seconds, which scared me more than almost anything else that happened that week, because Regina is about the least easily rattled person I've ever worked with. I asked her to explain, and she said the same cab-over truck had approached her position, slowed the way it had the previous 2 nights, and then stopped fully in front of her sign, engine running, headlights on, but through the windshield, in the wash of her flashlight and the ambient light from our nearby work lights, she could see straight through to the empty cab. No driver silhouette, no shape behind the wheel, nothing. Just an empty seat, steering wheel turning very slightly on its own, like it was making small corrections, the way a wheel does when a truck's rolling over uneven pavement, except the truck was stopped. She said she stood there frozen for probably 15 or 20 seconds, and then the truck simply reversed, backed up maybe 50 feet, still with no visible driver, and then pulled forward again, this time accelerating hard and swerving around her position through the closed lane, engine roaring in a way that felt deliberately aggressive, before speeding off into the dark ahead of our work zone. We called it in immediately, radioed our supervisor, who called Oregon State Police. A trooper met us at the scene about 30 minutes later, took statements from both Regina and myself separately, and drove the stretch of highway ahead of our position, looking for the truck. Nothing. No vehicle matching that description was found anywhere along that corridor that night, and dispatch had no record of any similar vehicle being reported by other drivers or way stations along that route. We finished out the striping job over the following 2 nights with State Patrol presence nearby as a precaution, and the truck never showed up again, at least not while we were working. Regina put in for a transfer to daytime flagging assignments not long after that, and I don't blame her one bit. I've asked her about it a few times since, gently, just to see if her account had shifted or softened with time the way memories sometimes do, and it hasn't. If anything, she's gotten more precise about certain details. She's mentioned since then that the truck's headlights never actually illuminated the road ahead of it properly, that the light from them seemed to just kind of stop a few feet past the grill instead of casting forward normally, something she said she didn't consciously register until she thought back on it. I've looked, since then, into whether there's any history of an accident on that stretch of I-84 involving a cab-over truck, any driver fatality that might explain what we saw as some kind of, I don't even know what word to use, residue, echo, whatever people call these things. I found one old newspaper reference to a fatal single-vehicle accident near that mile marker back in 1987, a truck that went off the road in icy conditions, driver killed on impact, but the article didn't specify the make or model of the truck involved, and I've never been able to confirm it either way. I still work nighttime highway crew sometimes, though I try to avoid that particular stretch when I can request different assignments. Doug thinks I should ask for a permanent transfer away from night shifts altogether, and some weeks I think he's right. But it's steady work, decent pay, and most nights out there really are just quiet and uneventful, cones and stripes and the hum of the machine, nothing more. Just not all of them. Story 5. The ghost on the tracker, I worked as a fleet dispatcher for a mid-sized trucking company based out of Fort Worth, Texas, from 2021 until early this year. This particular story happened in August of 2024, and I've hesitated to write it down anywhere because dispatchers don't usually end up as the ones telling these stories. We're supposed to be the safe voice on the other end of the radio, the person keeping drivers calm and on schedule. But that night, I was the one who couldn't do anything except watch. My name is Whitney Doss. I was 29 that summer, and I'd been dispatching for about 4 years by then. First for a smaller outfit, and then for this company, which ran a fleet of around 60 trucks across mostly Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana routes. I worked the overnight dispatch desk 3 nights a week, which meant I was the one tracking trucks in real time on our fleet management software, fielding check-in calls, handling anything that came up between midnight and 8 a.m. when the day shift took. Our system used GPS tracking units installed in every truck, showing live location, speed, and idle time on a big monitor wall, plus individual driver check-ins over a company app that logged their status, driving, on break, off duty. It's not glamorous work, but I liked it. There's something calming about the little dots moving slowly across a map at 3 a.m., knowing you're the thread connecting all these people out there alone in the dark to something back at base. The driver at the center of this is someone I'll call by his actual first name since he's given me permission to include this story, with the understanding that I'd change identifying details about his route and company. His name is Andre. Andre Fontaine, 38 years old, one of our most reliable drivers, ran a regular route hauling auto parts between a distribution center outside Fort Worth and various stops along I-35 up through Oklahoma into Kansas. On August 14th, Andre checked in around 11 p.m. from a truck stop outside Waco, Texas, right off I-35, Said he was taking his 30-minute break before continuing north. Normal check-in. Nothing unusual. I logged it and moved on to monitoring the other dots on my screen. Around 11:45, I noticed something odd on the tracker. A second dot had appeared very close to Andre's truck, close enough that at our map zoom level they were nearly overlapping. That wasn't unusual by itself. Trucks cluster at stops all the time, but this dot wasn't one of ours. Our system only displays company vehicles. It shouldn't have been picking up an outside vehicle at all, unless it was somehow using the same tracking frequency, which our IT guy had told me before was basically impossible given how our units were configured. The second dot had no identifying label, just a blank marker where a truck number should have been. I remember staring at that word for longer than I probably needed to. Following. Our system doesn't use that status label. The only statuses our software recognizes are driving, stopped, idle, and off-duty. I'd been using this software for over a year and had never seen following appear anywhere in it. I called Andre's cell, more out of an abundance of caution than real alarm at that point, figuring it was probably some kind of software glitch. He picked up sounding relaxed, said he was just finishing his coffee, everything fine. I asked carefully if there was another truck parked unusually close to his at the stop. He said actually yeah, now that I mentioned it, there'd been a cab over pull-in right next to him a few minutes ago. No trailer, engine still running, even though the driver seemed to just be sitting there. He said it wasn't blocking him or anything, just closer than felt necessary given how much empty space there was in the lot. I told him to keep an eye on it and let me know when he got back on the road. He laughed a little, said I sounded like his mother, and hung up. At 12:05 a.m., Andre's dot started moving again, back onto I-35 northbound. The second, unlabeled dot moved with it, not just in the same direction. It stayed at a nearly constant distance behind him, matching his speed almost exactly, mile after mile, in a way that real traffic just doesn't behave. Normal vehicles pass, fall back, exit, merge. This one held position like it was tethered to. I called Andre back around 12:20. He said yeah, he'd noticed. The cab over had pulled out right after him and had been sitting on his tail for a while now. Not tailgating exactly, just staying steady a couple hundred feet back, regardless of what speed he ran. He said he'd slowed down to let it pass at one point, and it had slowed down too, matching him, never overtaking. I told him I didn't like it, and he agreed, said he'd take the next exit and see if it followed. He took the exit for a gas station outside West Texas, a small town along that stretch, and I watched on my screen as both dots left the highway together, the unlabeled one peeling off just before the exit ramp, and then reappearing, somehow, already positioned near the gas station before Andre had even fully pulled. That detail still bothers me more than almost anything else about that night. There's no way a vehicle following from behind should have beaten him to a location he'd only just decided to go to. Andre called me from the gas station, and I could hear in his voice that he'd stopped treating this as a minor annoyance. He said the truck had parked at the far edge of the lot, away from the pumps, engine idling, and just sat there. He said he'd gone inside to buy something mostly as an excuse to get a better look and talk to the clerk. And while he was in there, the truck's headlights had gone from on to off to on again, 3 times, slow and deliberate, like something signaling. I told him to stay inside as long as he needed, that I'd call the local sheriff's non-emergency line and have someone swing by to check on the situation, which I did. A deputy arrived about 25 minutes later. By the time he pulled in, the cab over was gone. Andre said it had pulled out about 10 minutes before the deputy showed up, slow, unhurried, heading back toward the highway. On my screen, the unlabeled dot had vanished from the map entirely around the same time. Not moved off screen, not merged with traffic. The marker itself disappeared from the software, like it had never existed. I checked our system logs afterward, going back through the session data with our IT guy the next day, a very patient man named Curtis Whelan, who'd built most of our tracking software from scratch years earlier. Curtis pulled every log he could find and told me, flatly, that there was no record anywhere in our backend of a second unit ever appearing on that map that night. No API call, no data packet, nothing. As far as the actual server logs were concerned, only Andre's truck had ever been tracked. I asked him how I could have seen something on my screen that never happened on the server side. He didn't have an answer. He suggested maybe a caching glitch, a rendering error, something benign like that, but he said it in the tone of someone offering an explanation he didn't fully believe himself, just because it was easier than the... Andre finished his route that night with a state trooper escort for the first 50 miles or so, arranged informally through the deputy who'd responded, a favor between departments. Nothing else happened. He made his delivery on schedule the next morning, exhausted and rattled, but unhurt. I asked him afterward if he'd gotten any better look at the driver at any point. He said only once briefly while pulling out of the gas station. He'd glanced in his side mirror as the cab overpassed under a streetlight, and for just a second he saw someone in the driver's seat, wearing what looked like an old company uniform jacket, some kind of patch on the shoulder he couldn't make out clearly. He said the strangest part wasn't the face, which he barely got a look at. It was that the person's hands weren't on the wheel. They were folded in their lap, resting there, even though the truck was moving in a straight line down the on-ramp at the time. I still work dispatch sometimes, though I moved to day shifts about 6 months after that night, told my manager I needed the schedule change for personal reasons, and didn't elaborate further. Curtis left the company about a year later for an unrelated job, but before he left, he mentioned something to me almost in passing that I've never been able to shake. He said that when he'd been digging through our server's older archived logs, looking for the source of that August glitch, he found a reference, buried in code comments from years before either of us worked there, to a ghost tracking bug that the original software developer had apparently flagged and never resolved, with a note attached that just said, "Do not investigate." Curtis said he never found out what that developer had seen to write a note like that. Neither did I. I think about it sometimes on quiet dispatch nights, watching the little dots move across the screen, wondering how many of them I'm actually tracking and whether all of them are really trucks. Story 6. Doubled back, I want to start by saying I'm not a trucker, and I never worked at a truck stop either. I'm a wildlife biologist, and this happened while I was doing overnight roadkill and wildlife crossing surveys along Highway 93 in western Montana, between Missoula and Kalispell, in the fall of 2025. It's relevant that I wasn't part of the trucking world at all, because I think that's partly why what happened felt so disorienting. I didn't have any frame of reference for what was normal on that street. I was just a scientist with a clipboard and a truck full of equipment, driving slow with my hazards on, documenting deer and elk carcasses for a state wildlife corridor study. My name is Nadia Furlong. I was 32 that year, working under a contract with Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, doing a 6-week survey that required me to drive the same 40-mile stretch of 93 3 nights a week, between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., logging GPS coordinates for animal carcasses, checking on some motion sensor cameras we'd mounted near known crossing points, and generally just documenting patterns for a report on wildlife vehicle collisions in that corridor. The highway there runs along the edge of the Flathead Indian Reservation for part of its length, past small towns like Ronan and Pablo, through stretches of open ranch land and dense tree line that presses right up against the shoulder in places. Truck traffic uses it heavily as a connector route, especially at night when regular traffic thins out and drivers push to make time. I drove a fish and wildlife pickup, not exactly inconspicuous, with amber safety lights I could run when I was stopped on the shoulder logging a site. My work partner for this project was supposed to be a guy named Desmond Whitcomb, but he'd broken his ankle 2 weeks into the study, so for most of it I was doing these overnight surveys solo, which the department wasn't thrilled about but didn't have budget to fully staff other. The first 4 weeks were exactly what you'd expect. Quiet, methodical, occasionally sad given the subject matter, but nothing frightening. I got used to having the highway mostly to myself at those hours, aside from the steady stream of semis passing through. Things started shifting in week 5, early October. I began noticing a particular truck showing up repeatedly on my survey nights. A cab-over, no-trailer, older model, the kind you don't see much anymore since most fleets replaced them with conventional long-nose trucks decades ago. I want to be clear, I didn't think anything of it the first couple times. Regional routes have regular drivers, and it's not unusual to recognize a rig if you're out on the same road at the same hours. What started bothering me was the direction it was traveling. Highway 93 runs roughly north-south through that corridor. This truck, though, I kept seeing going both directions, sometimes within the same hour, sometimes at intervals too short to make sense for a real round trip given the distance to any logical turnaround point. I'd see it heading north around 12:30, and then again heading south around 1:10, which would only make sense if it had turned around almost immediately after passing me, for no apparent reason, since there's nothing up that stretch worth an immediate U-turn, just more highway and a couple small unincorporated. I mentioned it to Desmond over the phone one night, mostly just making idle conversation to keep myself alert during a long, uneventful survey stretch. He said maybe it was a local driver doing short-haul deliveries between 2 points along that corridor, going back and forth all night, which was a reasonable enough explanation that I mostly let it go. Then, in the second week of October, I set up a new motion sensor camera near a known elk crossing about 11 miles south of Ronan, standard placement height, angled to catch movement crossing the highway shoulder. I checked the footage a few nights later, sitting in my truck cab with a laptop, going through the clips looking for wildlife activity. Most of the footage was exactly what I expected. A couple of deer, one impressive bull elk at 2 a.m. that I got excited about professionally, raccoons, the usual. But there was a clip time-stamped 1:47 a.m. that stopped me cold. The camera had caught the cab-over truck passing on the highway in the background. Nothing unusual about that by itself, except the timestamp on a different clip from the same camera showed the same truck passing again at 1:52 a.m., 5 minutes later, traveling the opposite direction. 11 miles is not a road you can travel, turn around, and travel back in 5 minutes. Not even close. Especially not for a semi-truck, which can't exactly do a quick 3-point turn on a 2-lane. I went back through nearly 3 weeks of camera footage after that, methodically, and found the same truck appearing at that camera location 11 separate times, always traveling in pairs, northbound, then southbound a handful of minutes later, or vice versa. Timestamps that made a real round trip physically impossible given the distance involved. I don't fully know how to explain the feeling of realizing you've been unknowingly documenting something that shouldn't be possible for 3 weeks without noticing. It's not quite fear, not at first. It's more like a kind of vertigo, the ground shifting slightly under something you'd taken for granted. A woman named Priscilla Canaday, mostly framing it as a technical question. Could our cameras be misdated? Some kind of internal clock drift causing a false duplicate timestamp? She had our equipment tech look into it, and he confirmed the cameras were syncing correctly with GPS time signal, no drift, no error. The timestamps were accurate. I kept doing my surveys after that, though I'll admit I started parking differently, staying closer to well-lit town stretches when I needed to review data or take a break, instead of pulling onto isolated shoulder sections the way I had earlier in the project. The night ahead, November 23rd, a Thursday. I was parked on the shoulder near mile marker 34, logging coordinates for a mule deer carcass, hazards flashing, headlamp on as I worked. Around 1:40 a.m., I heard a vehicle slowing on the highway behind me, gravel crunching as it eased onto the shoulder. I turned, expecting maybe a concerned passing motorist checking if I needed help, which happens sometimes with my hazards on. It was the cab over. It pulled up slow, about 30 feet behind my truck, and stopped, engine idling, headlights on, aimed directly at me. I stood there in the beam of its lights, completely exposed, my own vehicle between us, but not much real protection given the distance. Nobody got out. Nothing happened for almost a full minute, which doesn't sound long until you're standing on an empty highway shoulder at 1:40 in the morning with a strange truck's headlights fixed on you and no way to know what's about to happen. I made a decision, probably not the smartest one in hindsight, but I called out, asked if they needed help, tried to sound calm and official, mentioned I was with Fish and Wildlife, doing survey work. No response. The engine just kept idling. I moved back to my own truck slowly, got in, locked the doors, and sat there with my hand on my radio, which I could use to reach the regional dispatch office for the department in an emergency. The cab over didn't move. Its headlights stayed fixed on my mirrors the entire time. After probably 3 or 4 minutes of this standoff, I decided to just drive, figuring movement was better than sitting still. I pulled back onto 93 heading north, watching my mirrors closely. The truck pulled out behind me, matching my speed, staying that same steady 30 or so feet back, the way you'd expect from a vehicle riding your bumper, except it never closed the distance further and never fell back either. I drove like that for almost 6 miles, hands shaking on the wheel, trying to decide whether to call 911 or just keep driving toward the nearest town, which was Ronan, close enough that I figured I could make it before deciding on anything else. Somewhere around mile marker 40, I glanced at my mirror and the headlights behind me were simply gone. Not receding into the distance, gone, mid-stretch, on a straight section of highway, with no side roads, no driveways, nothing it could have turned. I kept driving straight into Ronan, pulled into a gas station that was still open, sat in the parking lot under the lights until my hand stopped shaking enough to call Priscilla. She told me to come back to the field office early, that we'd figure out the survey schedule differently going forward, maybe pair me with someone even if it strained the budget. I finished the 6-week study with a research assistant riding along for the remaining overnight shifts, a college student named Otis Marchetti, who I made sure never heard the full story, because I didn't want to spook someone new to the work. The camera near mile marker 34 never captured the paired sightings again after that night, though I kept reviewing footage carefully for the rest of the study out of a mixture of scientific thoroughness and something closer to obsession. I compiled all of it in my notes at the time. The timestamps, the impossible round trips, the standoff on the shoulder, and included a redacted version in my final report to the department, framed carefully as an anomaly in equipment data rather than what I actually believed I'd experienced, because I needed my professional credibility intact, and there was no way to write what actually happened without sounding like I'd lost my grip on reality out there alone at night. I still do occasional fieldwork on other stretches of highway for different projects, though I've never taken another overnight assignment on 93 since, despite it being one of the better funded corridors for this kind of research in the state. I told my department I had scheduling conflicts, which wasn't true, but it was easier than the alternative explanation. The detail I've never been able to let go of, more than the impossible timestamps or the standoff itself, is something small. When I finally got home that night after the incident and unpacked my equipment, I found that my dashcam, which I always ran continuously during surveys as a matter of habit, had a 22-minute gap in its footage covering almost the entire encounter, timestamps jumping cleanly from 1:38 a.m. to 2 a.m. with nothing in between. No corruption error, no static, just a clean missing block like that stretch of time had simply been removed. My equipment tech checked the camera afterward and found nothing wrong with it mechanically. No reason it should have failed to record, and it's worked perfectly on every survey since. I don't know what happened during those 22 minutes that isn't accounted for by what I remember. I've tried, more than once, to reconstruct the timeline in my head, minute by minute, and it never quite adds up to the full gap. There's a stretch of time out there on Highway 93 that I lived through and apparently drove through, and I genuinely don't have access to all of it. That's 6 stories, 6 different roads, 6 people who probably still check their mirrors a little more than they used to. If there's one thread running through all of them, it's this. America's highway system is enormous. Millions of miles of asphalt, most of it running through places where the nearest help is 30, 40, sometimes 60 miles away. We trust that emptiness. We drive through it every day without thinking twice. But every trucker, every dispatcher, every night shift worker at some lonely gas station off the interstate has a story like this. Something that didn't add up. A truck that shouldn't have been there. A voice that knew a name it had no way of knowing. Most of the time, there's a rational explanation, or at least one we can convince ourselves of, so we can keep doing the job, keep making the drive, keep clocking in for the next overnight shift. But every now and then, someone comes back with a story that doesn't have an ending. Just a gap. A silence. A detail that never got explained. If you drive at night, if you work a route through empty country, if you've ever felt that specific kind of cold that has nothing to do with the weather, you already know what I'm talking about. Stay safe out there. And if you ever see a cab over with no trailer, running dark, matching your speed for a little too long, don't slow down to find out why. If you've got your own trucking horror story, drop it in the comments. I read every single one.